The 5 battleships for the 1936 battleship program would begin construction in 2 separate funding years, 1936, which would involve 2 ships, and 1937, which would involve the remaining 3. As for the 3rd ship, a tender was requested from the John Brown shipyard on the 21st of December 1936, and they had 3 competitors. Before sending out any tenders for any of the 5 ships, the Admiralty had already decided that they were going to disperse the work between 5 separate yards, so 1 yard would receive 1 ship order. The remaining 3 yards were Swan Hunter, Fairfield, and Harland and Wolff. But the Admiralty was already against selecting Harland and Wolff from the start because they did not have adequate facilities for constructing battleships. On the other hand, John Brown had experience and adequate facilities in constructing battleships and battlecruisers, and they had built numerous ones in the past, and so they were very confident that they were going to secure a contract, and on the 15th of February 1937, they submitted their quota of construction at £3.409 million. Now this number is approximately half of the ship's total construction, and that is because John Brown would not be manufacturing and supplying all of the components for the ship. They would only be building the hull, the electrical systems, and the primary machinery. The armament, fire control systems, navigation equipment, and various other small mechanical components would be supplied by third parties from the Admiralty, and so John Brown had no financial restrictions regarding those components. John Brown's quote also involved a profit margin of approximately £500,000, or about 17% of the total quote, and that is because John Brown was a private shipyard, and thus they needed to make a profit for their services. Though by the time construction was completed, their profit was closer to £250,000, or 7% of the quote cost. Once the tenders were submitted to the Admiralty, they would then be compared with one another. For example, Swan Hunter's tender quoted £3.423 million for construction, which was about £15,000 more than John Brown, and upon finding that there was consistency in the financing between the shipyards, the Admiralty would feel secure and satisfied with the results. Inevitably, John Brown was selected to construct the 3rd ship out of the program, and they were notified of this on the 28th of April 1937, and the contract would be signed on the 10th of July 1937. This contract would be a bonding agreement between the Admiralty and John Brown with regards to one specific ship, which at this moment was being preemptively named Anson, so supplies could be ordered under a name. The contract would lay out what components were expected from the John Brown shipyard, while it also specified what the Admiralty would be supplying, and components that the Admiralty supplied to John Brown would be fitted to the ship by John Brown. The Admiralty would also supply John Brown with a relatively detailed design plan, which involved dimensions, shear, camber, plate thicknesses, so on and so forth, though John Brown was expected to draw working plans, which would be frames, hull plates, and other components along those lines. Even though John Brown would be responsible for creating the working plans, the contract specified that these were property of the Admiralty and not the shipbuilder. The contract also specified penalties regarding corruption, unauthorized access, and mishandling of components, which could sacrifice the integrity of the design. Finally, the contract specified that upon completion of work at John Brown, the ship would be moved to Rosyth, and rental would be of no cost to the shipyard. The Admiralty would cover all cost. While there, it would undergo sea trials, and by the 15th of January 1941, all work had to be completed, and the ship had to be commissioned within the Royal Navy. Otherwise, John Brown would have to pay a penalty of £200 per day the ship was late. Prior to the end of December 1936, John Brown was unofficially alerted to the fact that they would be receiving a contract for ship construction, and they were given the go-ahead to begin collecting materials, and so by the beginning of January 1937, they ordered 1,300 tons of steel from Messrs. Colville, which was a steelmaker in Scotland. Throughout the remainder of January and into the first half of February, John Brown would continue to receive tidbits of information regarding bulkheads, the double bottom, and the ship's shell plating, and as a result, they continued to increase their orders of steel, resulting in an order of 2,600 tons. On the 15th of February 1937, Building Berth Number 3 was selected for the construction of the new battleship, and as a result, it was to be prepared for the keel blocks to be arranged. By the end of February 1937, approximately 400 tons of steel had arrived at John Brown, and they were prepared to begin shaping plates for the keel and double bottom, but progress with the Admiralty was slow, and the information they had received was not yet adequate to begin excessive work. By the 20th of March 1937, the loftsmen were engaged in a process called screeving. Screeving occurred when the loftsmen received the working plans from the draftsmen, and then the loftsmen would upscale these plans to full size, drawing them on the mold loft floor, preparing them for fairing. Once these drawings were completed, the loftsmen would then create wooden templates for each shell plate and frame. They would then send these templates to the steelworking shops, where they would be handled by platers, anglesmiths, shipsmiths, and shipwrights. By the end of March 1937, approximately 1,000 tons of steel had been delivered to the shipyard, but unfortunately, progress with the Admiralty remained slow, and so the loftsmen work also remained slow. It was not until the 27th of March 1937 that the Admiralty sent John Brown the main steel structure plans, and as a result, John Brown quickly circulated the keel plans to the yard. By the 19th of April 1937, John Brown finally began receiving deck plans for the lower deck, and as a result, they were able to increase their steel order to 3,500 tons. Shipwrights were also engaged in completing keel blocks, which would then be arranged on Building Berth Number 3, which the keel was expected to be laid on in early May. On the 20th of April 1937, John Brown was notified that the government approved them for funding for the construction of one of the 3 ships, and so they could accelerate the pace of material orders, and they increased their steel order to 4,000 tons, which by the 30th of April, approximately 2,000 tons had been delivered, and progress on the shaping of the keel plates and frames were advanced. On the 5th of May 1937, with the keel blocks being properly arranged on Building Berth Number 3, hull number 554 was officially laid down. In this photo of Duke of York's keel, there are a few important notes worth making. Firstly, you'll notice to the left of the Duke of York's keel, there is a temporary railway system which a steam-powered crane is residing upon. This crane would be used for the early stages of construction, lowering keel plates into place. As construction on the ship's bottom advanced, the tracks could be steadily moved outward, and the crane would continue to be used for the installation of the double bottom and lower hull plates. You'll also notice that on both sides of the keel, shipyard workers have already laid out components that will comprise the double bottom, with the primary plates already having their steel angles riveted to them, which was completed in the steel working shed. As for the keel itself, several large plates would be lowered onto the keel blocks, and then properly aligned. Once aligned, butt straps would be joined to the connection of each plate, which would then be screwed up. This process is when several plates were secured together through bolting, typically 4 to 6 bolts depending on the size and location of the plate. Once a large segment of plates had been properly aligned, the riveters would come along and then rivet the plates together, removing the bolts as they went. Having mentioned the riveter, I believe that they need special attention because there are different methods of riveting that would be used throughout the construction of this ship. First, we have the process of hand riveting, which involved a left-hand riveter, right-hand riveter, and a holder. A heating boy would heat up a rivet in a heating brazier, and from there, the rivet would be passed on to the holder, who would insert the rivet into the backside of a plate. Then, on the front side of the plate, the left and right-hand riveter would hammer the head of the rivet to secure it to the plates. The second method was pneumatic riveting, which only involved 2 men, a riveter and a holder. The holder's job remained the same, but as for the riveter, he had a pneumatic rivet gun, which used compressed air to flatten the head of the rivet, securing it to the plate. The final method was hydraulic riveting, which only required 1 person. Once the rivet was inserted into the plates, a U-shaped device utilizing water pressure would then squeeze the rivet on both ends simultaneously, securing it to the plates. All three methods would see extensive use depending on what section of the ship was being riveted. With that, the vertical keel of Hull 554 was in place and ready for the next stage. However, that will be the topic for the next part in this series. So, with that having been said, I have nothing more I wish to add on to this topic for today. If you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.